I'm Scott Jones. I'm trying to remember when I became a fellow. It was either 1982 or 83. I am serving as the bishop of the Texas Annual Conference. It's been the toughest year of my professional life without any question. Last Saturday I presided over a special session of my annual conference where one half of the churches disaffiliated. My goal in that process was to bless each church and each clergy person and help them find where they can best serve Christ. That was an attempt at graciousness that nevertheless led to a lot of vitriol and bad blood. I am retiring 21 days from now, but who is counting? For years I told the clergy in my conference that there is no retirement from discipleship. So I will be finding new ways to serve Christ. I'm just not sure where and whether anybody will pay me for it.
Remind us about your family.
I have a wife, Mary Lou, who recently sold her construction company to our daughter. So we have a fourth generation in the construction business going on. I have 7 grandchildren, 2 of them in Dallas, where I'm going to be 8 minutes away from their home. The daughter who just bought the construction company has 3 children, including a new baby in Wichita, and then my oldest son is in Denver with 2 of my other grandchildren. So life is good. Grandchildren are the one thing in life that cannot be oversold.
Scott, just know that we pray for you, and we're thankful for you, and the leadership that you've provided, and the modeling of leadership that you've provided, and we just value that so much, so thank you for that. Doug, I saw somewhere, and Doug didn't do an introduction.
Joy Moore was more on that list.
Okay, Joy, where are you? Okay, let's go.
I was happy for Doug to go next.
I just woke Doug up.
Good evening, friends. Woo, that works. I haven't had enough coffee, but this is wired. Thank you for getting that. I am Joy Moore, and I am a professor of biblical preaching at Luther Seminary in St. Paul, Minnesota. I've been there since the fall of 2019. So I've actually stayed in the same place a couple of Christmas conferences. I know you're not used to that. Even the lights aren't used to that. But it has been a learning and growing opportunity for me to be working among the Lutherans, and I'm very happy to have stepped out of administration and returned to teaching in my discipline. But I'm also praying for a miracle from God to maybe allow me to teach in a place where I feel like I'm doing ministry that I've been called to do and not just a job. So I ask for your prayers.
Joy was on the team that was in Africa in Benin, and there were many times whenever we would end up getting introduced right after each other. And people would say, this is Dr. Steve Moore, and this is Dr. Joy Moore, and they would always go, oh! And so what began to happen is before they got to that part, Joy would just say, no, we're not connected. She was a little too quick, I think, on that. Where's Doug? There you go. You went last time. Okay, there we go. Kim.
Hey everybody, I'm Kim Reisman, and I can't also remember when I was a fellow, but it was a little bit after the Steve Sowers time. So a few years after that, right around the time of Kevin Watson and Andrew Thompson. So that's my benchmark of time frame. But I'm the Executive Director of World Methodist Evangelism, and World Methodist Evangelism brings together the entire Wesleyan family, which is way, way, way bigger than the United Methodist Church. And it is just a real joy to be able to do that. And one of the things that I'm excited about in my work is the focus of my dissertation was using Miroslav Volf's image and metaphor of embrace, which he used to outline the process of reconciliation. And I adapted that to outline the process of evangelism and reaching out, and also a way to visualize Wesley's understanding of salvation. And that has been something that has been really wonderful to see resonate across the world. So I've been very, very excited about that. Another thing I'm excited about, which I hope that you all will be connected to, is an app that we're launching called We419, and it is a online community platform where we will be able to house resources, videos. We'll be able to teach courses. We'll be able to network with each other in groups that are private and secure and safe. And so I'm really hoping that we can have an opportunity to talk more about ways in which AFTI can connect with all the different things that we're doing and impact lay people beyond your circles. Because so many of you are doing really, really amazing things. And it would be wonderful to be able to have lay people have access beyond your circles. And I think We419 is going to be a wonderful, wonderful way.
There's also a Denman Scholar.
Yes, I'm a Denman Scholar, and went to Durham, did my work at Durham under David Wilkinson also. So.
And We419.
We419. You can get it on the App Store, any of your app stores.
And what does that mean? Where does that come from?
We is WE, which references world evangelism, but also the community that we're hoping to build, as in we. And 419 is Matthew 4:19, where Jesus promises to make us fishers of people.
Hey, Steve.
Hey.
I didn't give my other credentials.
Okay.
I happen to remember when I was a fellow because it was 2001, which is why I knew that was not when the Sowers were. I don't follow them that closely. And I did my work at London School of Theology under Joel Green and Derek Tidwell, and I did it in practical theology with a focus, on biblical preaching.
Okay. Bria, I'm going to turn it over to you all. Let you. Okay. We're going to come back and do other introductions at dinner. So.
Sorry. Not sorry.
All right. Good evening. My name is Jason Borders, and I'm one of the religion faculty here at the college. And Miss Bria Rochelle-Stephens, also a faculty member here at the college, are the moderators for tonight's discussion. We're feeling the power. We're not fellows, but we have power over you. But we'd like to welcome you. I know I speak for Bria too on behalf of the college. We're hope you felt very welcomed as you've been on campus, and we hope also that your conversations have been enriching. So again, welcome to the college. What we're going to do, Bria will have a few more words to say about the Equal Justice Initiative. But before I begin, I wanted to introduce our panelists. You already know them, but just in case there was someone here that didn't get to see them last night, I'm going to put on my glasses. This is new for me. Yeah, I'm feeling my age. Dr. David Daniels, here immediately to my right, is a professor of church history at McCormick Theological Seminary. And if you were here last night, you also know that he's an ordained minister of the Church of God in Christ. To his left is Mr. Ian Rowe. He's a senior fellow at the American Enterprise Institute, where he focuses on education and upward mobility, family formation, and adoption. And Dr. Joy Moore, who just introduced herself, I won't say that again. Joy and I have the honor of coming through the program that she did just about the same time with Joel Green. So it's good to see you again.
It's good to see you.
Well, please join me in welcoming our panel. Bria and I are going to get the ball rolling here in just a few minutes. We have come up with a question to ask, and the panelists have already received those questions. While they are speaking, if you would like to have a question for us to ask the panelists, would you please write it on your card and just hold it up and we'll walk around and pick that up and be sorting those as they discuss what it is they want to say. We're trying to keep, and panelists, this is for you, about 3 minutes per response, if you can keep it to that, just so that we can get as many questions as possible. Again, welcome.
Thank you, Jason. Like Jay said, I am Bria Rochelle-Stephens. I am a graduate of Huntingdon College and currently teach in the religion faculty here. So just wanted to give a word about the Equal Justice Initiative and our experience today. The Equal Justice Initiative was founded by Brian Stevenson, initially as an organization dedicated to providing legal services to inmates on death row who had been wrongly convicted or unfairly tried. Since its founding in 1989, Mr. Stevenson and his legal team have represented countless people and reversed wrongful convictions. As the EJI continued to expand its services, the focus on public education about mass incarceration, racial injustice within the justice system, and the brutal legacy of racial terror lynchings became vital. We've all had a chance to visit the Equal Justice Initiative Museum and Memorial today. Reading and hearing the stories from those that are still present with us and those that have gone on before us demonstrates the harsh realities of a system and a world that has far too long thrived on the disenfranchisement of certain people groups. As we lean into the Wesleyan principles of social holiness as it relates to racial injustice, we ask ourselves, what is it that we, as heirs of this tradition, are called to do? Our panelists are here to discuss their reactions to the EJI Museum and Memorial, and to hear from you all any questions that you may have for them. So we will begin this session by asking our panelists a couple questions, and you may join us here on the stage if you would like. And as we ask these questions, again, as Jason mentioned, we would invite you all to write on your note cards any questions that you may have for them. All right, so to get it started, and you may go in whatever order you would like. Our first question. The museum asserts that racism is not dead, but evolving from mass enslavement to mass incarceration. How do you believe the evolution of racism in America continues to shape theological higher education in the church? And in what ways has theological higher education in the church reshaped the conversation on race?
Thank you for the invitation. So currently I believe that the best way to begin to talk about race is to ask, how do we reduce and eliminate racial disparities in lifespan, health, income, wealth, education, incarceration rates, etc. I think we're at a dead end of talking about equality. We've tried that, we've had so many things to undermine that, and we haven't figured out, as Sandra Day O'Connor said, when do we need to end affirmative action? I think we need to end affirmative action when racial inequalities are minimal or non-existent. Racial disparities, are minimal or non-existent. So I think that's the new question. I think we need to ask that ourselves, related to churches, related to schools. So no longer are we admitting people, but what are the disparities and how are they eliminated? The second part of that is whose voices are being heard in theological education. I still find that a number of syllabi marginalize minority voices. I'm not saying they should be 100% of a course, but seemingly there should be some voice, some perspective that's there, especially dealing with the issues that the Legacy Museum was trying to address. How do we then, as I was mentioning last night, not only coexist, but how do we co-govern? And then related to how the church shapes the racial discussion. As far as I can tell, but Joy and Ian and others of you might have a better idea, but it looks like that the racial reconciliation approach has come to a dead end. A lot of energy was put in it from the 90s all the way into maybe 2016. Some places have embraced anti-racism as a perspective, but there's a number of places within the church have rejected anti-racist as an approach, as well as critical race theory. And they're left with nothing at this point. They know what they're against, they know what they left behind, but they don't know how to talk about racial justice. So I think the church in this opportune time needs to recover that, but I'm not sure which way the church will go.
Thank you, and thank you for this invitation. As Jason said, I am a senior fellow at the American Enterprise Institute, but I also, for the last decade, ran a network of public charter schools in the heart of the South Bronx and the Lower East Side of Manhattan, and just launched this past August an international baccalaureate high school in the Bronx, organized around the principles of equality of opportunity, individual dignity, and our common humanity. So I come at this question not so much as a theologian, but more so as an educator. And the thing that I often think about, because I have the responsibility of how to help young people, particularly low-income Black and Hispanic students, make sense of what we saw today. How do you put this kind of human cruelty into context? And how do we help young people understand our history, yet recognize that we don't have to be constrained by it, nor doomed to repeat it? And when you walk through a museum and the memorial like we did today, it's very easy to, I think, just to ascribe pure evil to white people and complete victim status to Black people. And of course, when you see 4,400 names of people that were lynched, there is no nuance. That is pure evil. Especially when it's coupled with government-sanctioned lynching and no penalties for the people who did this horrific set of actions. But even in this seemingly binary story, there is humanity and compassion of the people who were fighting against these things. And there's evil that sometimes wore a different color. And so I sometimes struggle when I go through an experience like this. So for example, when we first entered the museum today, one of the first words that popped out at me was the word kidnapped. That there were 12 million Africans that were kidnapped. And kidnapped is obviously a word that indicates taken against your will. And these people certainly were. But what's lost in that story, and this is hard to grapple with, is the role of Black Africans who participated in the slave trade to make some of this horrific behavior happen. And it's just part of the complexity of humanity that we actually try to work with, even with our students. How does a society come to allow things like this to happen? I remember reading a book several years ago called Hitler's Willing Executioners. I'm not sure if people are familiar with it, but it's quite an extraordinary book that basically outlines how average German citizens on an everyday basis came to believe that Jewish people were just simply not just less than human, but vile, not worthy of living, okay to treat them horrifically. And so the Holocaust wasn't just an act of the SS and the leadership, but a whole society that agreed and allowed this to happen. And so these kinds of complexities, I think, have to happen. I just meant and for those of you who know, I'm here with my daughter, Camille, who's 13, so we're experiencing this also through her eyes. And just so that she knows that these behaviors are learned, and they can be unlearned. And I think the key is that we are treating people as individuals and not simply representatives as groups. who we, sort of assign these types of stereotypical behaviors and attitudes. So we'll speak about this more, but that was my initial reaction to the visit today.
I too thank you for this opportunity to sit among this panel and be part of this conversation. I'm going to dive into the end of the question in terms of how has theological education addressed this. I'm going to dare to say, in my opinion, not so humbly, poorly, because we don't have a theological address to this situation. Several years ago, J. Cameron Carter wrote a book called Race, subtitled A Theological Account, where he acknowledges in the beginning that we've talked about this economically, socially, ethically, morally, psychologically, culturally, but we've never talked about it theologically. And so as I read the question, I thought, we've failed because we have not taken the opportunity to speak from a faith perspective that is different, that offers the world a nuanced perspective that both does what the gospel always does, and that's calls us to accountability in a way where we acknowledge our complicity and in the power of the Spirit respond by saying, I've sinned against you, God, as I've sinned against my neighbor. But hoping in the power that God offers us, that things can be different. To quote the theologian Michael Jackson, starting with the man or the woman in the mirror. But I think it's a failure on our part, and I think I'm grateful that the fellowship is having this conversation, and I hope that we will find a way to have it where we might be able to reinvigorate a theological conversation.
Thank you. We've got one more question for you from us before we open it up to the audience. This last question. How do you believe the idea of social holiness calls us to disrupt and speak up about the legacy of racial and socioeconomic injustice within our criminal justice system and within the wider church world?
So first of all, I'm a historian and not a theologian. And so I hear that among the Wesleyans, there's a discussion about whether social holiness only applies to sociality, to relationship, being in a community, such as a class meeting, or whether John Wesley's opposition to slavery, his anti-slavery perspective, the early Methodist requirement that to be a member you cannot hold slaves, whether that should also be incorporated within social holiness. So I realized among Wesleyans that is debated, and I'm not sure where the outcome is. But let's say it's the latter. Let's say John Wesley was a consistent Wesleyan, and let's say he tied together both the sociality along with saying that there's issues like slavery that's part of social holiness. If that is the case, then we need to figure out how our reading of the gospel does not have us conform to the world, but have us seeking to transform the world. We need to then struggle with how that is expressed within our liturgy, within our prayers, within our preaching, within our class meetings or discipleship. That all becomes part of the retrieval of social holiness. The second thing is that I personally am not one that feels that the current state of the African American situation, condition, plight, is the outgrowth of slavery. I think that if there wasn't the burning of the Greenwood district in Tulsa and Wilmington and Rosewood, if there wasn't redlining, we would be way ahead. But even, let's say we accept that. there were gains between 1965 and 1990 with affirmative action, with equal opportunity. But a lot of those gains have been lost through the war on drugs, mass incarceration, through undermining of unions. You can go down the line of things that have undermined social progress, not only for African Americans, but for working white people. So therefore, where we are now, partly from what happened since 1990, not what happened in 1900, or 1800, I should say. The second thing then is, if that is the case, then what we need to do is to figure out how we reverse that. How we reverse what happened with one strike, you're out, and all those other policies. How do we, as has already been done, have some equal sentencing for drugs, not distinguishing between crack and heroin? How do we do those things, again, in order to reduce the racial inequities? Lastly with that is how can we disrupt things? So one, again, reduce and eliminate racial disparities, racial inequities and disparities. New Jersey legislature, for instance, has what they call a racial audit. So for every legislation that's being proposed, they do a racial audit. What is the implications of this policy on Black, brown, and white communities and Asian communities within New Jersey? And then they can figure out if it has a greater burden on one community than they want to live with, then the policy needs to be tweaked or needs to be changed. What if we did that with every policy? What if my seminary did that with all our policies? What if a congregation, what if we did that with everything? To try to figure out, instead of waiting, oh wow, we didn't know it was going to undermine the Black community. We didn't know it was going to undermine the white working class. If we know that ahead of time, then maybe we won't do it. And then lastly, with disrupting, how do we look at best practices that can help us actually improve society? Maybe not what we do, but maybe what the Swedes do or what some other place does. How do we move towards a society where people can have a living wage, have decent health care and outcomes with that? And then, obviously, I was part of a generation that never thought reparations would ever be anything but a sideline conversation. Reparations now are discussed by the California legislature as well as other places. Churches, the Methodists, Episcopals, and others have done reparations. So I think that needs to be thought about. And I think the Legacy Museum helped us see that there was so much that was done to undermine the lives of African Americans, in addition to lynching, all the way up to the present, that people are due. And if I can say one more thing, I also was wondering within the Truth and Reconciliation Commission in South Africa, whether we need something like that. And that came to my mind when, I don't know if you saw the question that was raised by the Citizens Council. The question was something like,
What have you done for segregation? What have you done
to maintain? What have you done to maintain segregation for today? And that was 1963. And I think that maybe there needs to be some discussion about that. And maybe there needs to be some airing. Maybe communities, if it was only a town of 500 and 3,000 show up for a lynching, maybe people in the town maybe need to discuss who was involved, how do they look at it, and how do we move forward. Maybe there needs to be some truth-telling. Again, the German government and the Israeli government are looking for 98-year-old Germans who were involved in the Holocaust. Maybe we